Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to Food Access in Rural Communities, a webinar hosted by the National Policy and Legal Analysis Network to Prevent Childhood Obesity here at ChangeLab Solutions. And my name is Heather Wooten. I'm a Vice President of Programs here at ChangeLab. I got my start planning for local food systems, so this is definitely one of my favorite topics. And I'm joined today by my colleagues Christine Fry and Rio Holliday, who staff our Rural Healthy Food Access team. We'll also hear today from Tom Redfern at Rural Action Sustainable Agriculture, who is an inspiring leader working with farmers and retailers in rural Ohio, trying to connect the dots between local economic development and healthy communities. Here's what you'll learn on this webinar. First, Christine will talk about how to build a rural food access strategy. Then we'll get a chance to learn about Tom's work and even see a produce auction in action. Last but never least, Rio will show us the money, or at least show us where to look for the money. And we'll take your questions and comments as we go, so please join the conversation via the chat box. As always, here's a quick plug. Today's webinar is part of a series of Healthy Food Access virtual learning labs. You can find recordings of all of our past webinars on our website, or tune in live to our October and November webinars looking at food access from the distribution and policy angles. The first thing that I want to show you guys is a food access framework that ChangeLab has been working with for about the past year or so. We've tried to capture what evidence says, not to mention common sense, about how individual choices are shaped by community food environments. So first in this frame, you can see we have physical access. We know that having a store that sells healthy food within a convenient distance from home or work makes a big difference. And that also, if it's easier to get to stores selling unhealthy food, it's harder to make healthy choices. Second, we have economic access. This might be the most important aspect of food access. Economic access means whether or not you have the purchasing power to afford a healthy diet. Third, we have cultural access. We all know from our own experience how important culture is in shaping the foods we choose, whether it's the sort of general acceptance we now see of eating in the car or on the run in our current culture of convenience, or going out of our way to find a special food item that's meaningful to ourselves or our families. And last, we have knowledge access. And that means if healthy food is physically and economically accessible, do we have the skills to prepare it? So a simple way to think about this framework is with these 4 words: find, afford, use, and choose. Those are the key concepts to shaping food access. We also know that policies can target different aspects of food access. For example, if there's no grocery store in a community, they might use a policy to incentivize grocery store development, or another policy to improve transit access between residents and grocery stores. In the economic front, we have federal food assistance programs like SNAP and WIC, which augment purchasing power of low-income shoppers. But so might a living wage ordinance or a workforce development policy. Cultural aspects of food might seem outside the scope of policy, but one good example is how changes to the WIC program allowed states to include culturally relevant foods like whole grain tortillas or tofu in the WIC food package. And finally, we have a long way to go in terms of building food skills and knowledge, but policies like home economics or food literacy in schools are good examples. It's also important to recognize that food access has both a supply side and a demand side. Where food is sold and what's available on the shelves is the supply side, but the demand side is important too. And each one of these factors contributes to food access. Different communities might find that certain factors are more important or bigger barriers to food access than others. But there's no question that in many parts of the rural U.S., communities face barriers to getting healthy food. And this map, which came from an article called Rural Poverty, Food Access, and Public Health Outcomes, shows the relationship between rural poverty and physical lack of access to healthy foods. And you can see there are wide sections of the U.S. that struggle with this problem. So we want to hear from you. What's the food access challenge facing your community? I'm pulling up a poll now, and you can select which of those barriers that I just mentioned in our food access framework are the biggest ones for you. We've got a question coming in from Elizabeth. She asked, what were the 4 items? Find, afford, choose, and use. Those are the 4 items. as people fill in their poll results. I'll give you just a few more seconds. Okay, thank you for participating. We've got lots of activity on our poll today. Over 100 of you have now filled in your response. So it looks like affording healthy food is one of the biggest challenges facing people in communities who are participating on our webinar today. But we see a strong showing for all of the above, for food knowledge, and for finding healthy food as well. So you can see that these factors might play out where you have combinations of factors affecting food access, and you really need to think about those factors when you're crafting a food strategy. Which brings us to our next speaker. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Christine Fry. Christine is a Senior Policy Analyst and Program Director at ChangeLab Solutions. She's written extensively on public health policy with an emphasis on food and agricultural issues, including the Federal Farm Bill and the impact of restaurant and retail policy on public health. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks, Heather, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining us. And the goal of my section today is to talk about some of the different strategies that can be used to improve access to food in grocery stores or in a retail environment in rural communities. I'm mostly going to be focusing on that kind of find portion of Heather's food access framework. In addition to working on our food retail projects, I tend to stray towards working with rural communities and on rural policy strategies, in part because I grew up in a rural place. I grew up in a town called Due West, South Carolina, with a population of 1,200. Our little town had 3 convenience stores, but the closest grocery store was about 10 miles away in a town called Honeypath. And I have fond memories of going to one of the convenience stores every day during the summer to get candy, which might have been one of the healthiest things that convenience store sold. So right now, government at all levels has incredibly low approval ratings, and it seems like nothing can get done because no one wants to cooperate. And in this atmosphere, it's easy to forget the important role that government can play in our communities. One of the most important functions of government is to protect the health, the safety, and welfare of citizens. Food access fits very solidly into that function. You can't be healthy or lead a good life if you don't have access to food. So government can and should play a role in ensuring that people have access to food through grocery stores in their communities. Now, I'm not saying the government should always be the leader or driver of these efforts, but it can be a strong partner. A lot of things get done in rural communities, I know, through the sheer determination of individuals and community groups. But if there's one thing that you take away from my talk today, it's to consider government at the local, state, and even federal level as a partner in grocery access. So part of my job is to field questions from people in governments or community-based organizations all around the country who want to improve the health of their communities. Sometimes they come with a specific idea, like we want to do a retail policy, but we encourage them to first take a step back and think about their overall health goals for the community before jumping right into a specific strategy. And so that's what these 3 questions are that we'll walk through during my section. Communities that identify as rural are incredibly diverse in terms of geography, density, and economy. You have highly dispersed, unincorporated areas where the closest town center might be 20 or more miles away. And then you have incorporated communities that might have a traditional main street. And then you have places somewhere in between. So every rural community is dealing with a different set of food access challenges, which just adds another layer of complexity to the situation. So it's important to, again, take a step back, think about what the retail environment looks like before diving into the goals and then ultimately what strategies you want to use. So I kind of think about the rural retail environment with there's sort of 3 different types. In some places, there's no food retail. They rely on a store that might be anywhere from 5 to 100 miles away. Other rural communities might have some retail, maybe a gas station, a convenience store, a dollar store, but there's no full-service grocery. And then others actually do have a nice market. Often it's locally owned, but they're really worried about the sustainability of that business. So think about, where does your community fall within that spectrum? And there might be other points on that spectrum that I didn't identify. Once you've figured that out, you want to start to try to match your goal to the retail environment that you have. So for example, if your community already has a grocery store, your priority probably isn't going to be to attract a new one to the community. You want to focus on preserving it. So I put together, if there's one thing that we love around here at Change Lab Solutions, it's arrows and boxes and framework-y type things. So I put together some ideas for how to kind of organize your thoughts around matching up your retail environment to potential goals and strategies. So if you're in that no food retail category, where you have to drive to another town to get any food, you're probably thinking about building some kind of new retail or attracting new retail. So you want to think about, can your community sustain a full grocery store or a small market? Or maybe if not that, some stripped down version of it, like a farmer's market or a mobile market, and recognize that people will still have to go to a different community to meet all of their grocery needs. And then if you're thinking about sending people to a different community for most of their groceries, you want to think about the transportation. How are people getting there? Who is struggling to get to the grocery store on a regular basis? Are there policies or systems that can be used to help, maybe it's seniors, maybe it's low-income families, help connect them to the grocery store and to other places that they need to get to on a regular basis? If you're in the middle category of having some food retail, but maybe not a full-service grocery store, here you might be looking at improving that existing infrastructure. So thinking about what do those retailers, whether they run a convenience store or a small market on the main street, what do they need in order to offer more healthy options? You also may want to attract a grocery store if you mostly just have small convenience markets. And again, you also want to look at the transportation issues. And finally, if you are fortunate to have a small grocer who is just trying to get by, you're going to be thinking about how to help them basically be better business people. So looking at efficiencies like what kind of refrigeration equipment and lighting, and can you help them access government grants and loans that can help them upgrade to more energy efficient refrigeration equipment and lighting to save money. You can also help them with building demand. So again, that's looking at connecting people to the grocery store, making sure they can get there, and also looking at different ways that you can attract people to the store and teach them about what products are actually offered there. We've heard from some rural communities that the community may not even realize that they can get all of their grocery needs met within the community, that they don't have to drive to another place. And then this final thing of connecting it is just showing, I mentioned transportation and making sure people can actually physically get to the grocery store is important regardless of which of these retail environments you're thinking about. So in closing, let's look at a few examples of kind of matching up different goals to different retail environments and some specific roles of government in that. So if you're in the build it category, one potential way that the government can support that action is through policy. So this is an example from Hutto, Texas, and apologies to folks from Texas if I pronounced that incorrectly. So this community has lost a grocery store a long time ago, and they've been trying to attract one for a long time now. And so a couple of years ago, the City Council actually passed a resolution expressing support for attracting a grocery store to the community. Now, this resolution, isn't going to attract a grocery store by itself, but it serves a function of kind of building momentum and building support in the community for the idea. So the resolution, the language, actually asked community members to write letters to their favorite grocery stores, asking them if they might consider locating a store in the community. So resolutions can be a good kind of first step towards a bigger kind of food access plan by providing an opportunity to educate local leaders and also providing a way to kind of marshal energy and support around your plan. If you're in that middle category of wanting to improve what infrastructure you already have, one way that local governments are doing this is through healthy food retail programs. And this is something that we often see in local governments, either local health departments or city or town agencies, but it can also be something that's led by a community-based organization. So the idea here is reaching out to the retailers in the community, and if it's a really small place with only a handful of them, you can reach every single one. And looking at what they're already selling, talking to them about the concerns they have about selling, say, more fresh produce, and then trying to provide technical assistance and figure out ways to help them sell more healthy products. So that might be helping them find refrigeration equipment, or even in some cases paying for it with a grant, to connecting them to local farmers and helping them tap into the local food system and help support that local economy. And that's actually something our next speaker, Tom, is going to talk more about. And then finally, if you're in the position of having a grocery store but wanting to figure out ways to support it, the local government can do that through funding. So we've heard of different models of this. There's a community in Kansas, a rural community in Kansas, where the school district will purchase bagged lunches from their local small grocer who has a deli when the kids from the school district go on field trips. So they're obviously not buying all of their food for school meals at the grocer, but they are trying to, when they do need to make those bagged lunch purchases, trying to support their local business. Another model is cooperative purchasing. So a lot of rural communities struggle with getting the distribution truck to actually stop in their community and meeting that minimum order requirement. And so grocers will band together with schools and other institutions that are making regular food purchases so that they can meet the minimum order requirement and even hopefully get some volume discounts as a result of making a bulk purchase. So that's just in a nutshell some ideas to think about and ways to get started when you're thinking about how to increase access to healthy food through the retail environment in rural communities. We have a lot of resources on our website around food retail. So we have this piece on thinking about how to attract a grocery store to a community. We also have Health on the Shelf, which talks about how to design and implement a healthy food retail certification program. So that's in that Fix-It strategy. And then we also have a number of pieces on kind of the details of working with retailers. So incentive ideas, distribution solutions, and also our next webinar will be on the distribution challenges and solutions for food retail. Here's my contact information. Please feel free to be in touch. And now I will hand it back to Heather.
Thank you so much, Christine. We had a couple of questions come in while you were talking, and I thought I'd open this up to actually either you or Rio so we can get a couple of perspectives here. The first question came from Rebecca, and she asked about how we're defining physical access. She mentions, I know it can be defined differently in urban versus rural. Even within those areas, there are multiple definitions. Rebecca, I didn't give a specific minimum distance, for example, for defining physical access, but I'm wondering if either Christine or Rio have thoughts about that, especially the difference between rural and urban places.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I was probably intentionally silent on that because I think it's really up to, like I said, the environments in rural communities are so different. I mean, it can be almost suburban to very, very spread out. And so I think that's really a decision that each place needs to decide, is what's an acceptable distance that we're going to go for food. When you live in a rural place, you accept that you're going to be driving longer distances to pretty much do anything. And so a standard, like in an urban place where I want to be able to walk to a grocery store is probably not feasible, or it doesn't fit within that context. So I think that's something where when you're getting started, you want to look to the community and see what they think and what challenges they have actually getting to the grocery store.
Christine, that's such a good point to ask community where they're shopping now. When we were preparing for this webinar, one of the things that kept occurring to me was some of the similarities between long distances that people will spend getting to grocery stores in both urban and rural places. And in rural places, you might have that be a factor of actual distance. In urban places, you might have it be a factor of sort of slow transit connections or other things that make the trip to the grocery store take an hour or more. And so I think we actually have more in common than we sometimes give ourselves credit for, but for different reasons. And asking the question, where do you shop now and how do you get there, is a good way to kind of begin to set those benchmarks. Mm-hmm. We had one more question come in from Wendy. She asked, I would love to see more strategies for an additional category. Christine, you mentioned these three categories of no retail, some retail, or you have good retail. She would love to see an additional category for too much bad retail, too much unhealthy food retail. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I was thinking about that in that some retail category. I wasn't making a value judgment one way or the other, but often it's bad. And I think the rest of the question was, what can local governments do to step up and do something about that? And often the question we get is, how can we work with these places to offer more healthy products? But in some cases, especially I think with fast food is where I see this happen a lot. We want to talk about kind of, should we actually be restricting or limiting that, or do we have enough, and do we not want to invite any more? And actually, that's done often through zoning, and a lot of places that want to preserve their historic character will restrict fast food and other types of businesses in order to preserve that, particularly in a Main Street area. And so a lot of rural places, particularly I hear about it here in California, like in Gold Country, are trying to attract tourism to their historic downtowns, and so they might consider those sorts of strategies to preserve that character. And then of course there's the health benefits as well.
And this is Rio. One other strategy that I've seen really recently is using the general plan to actually put in language about reducing disproportionate concentrations of unhealthy food sources. That's sort of a nicer way of saying limiting or restricting unhealthy food sources. And there are a couple different ways to do that. One is to restrict approvals of, say, liquor stores, and then one is to really dilute the unhealthy stores, saying, for example, creating healthy businesses or incentivizing healthy businesses in specific areas where there are a lot of unhealthy food sources.
And I just want to pick up on that. And we recently had a conversation with some folks in the Central Valley of California, which is a mix of rural and urban places. And their local elected officials are really hesitant to limit even unhealthy businesses because the economy is not very good there, and they see kind of any business as providing jobs, and that's their number one priority. And so one idea that we talked about when we were just sort of brainstorming different ways to deal with the unhealthy stuff and increase access to healthy food was to always think about sort of paired strategies, like Ria was saying. So, having some restrictions on businesses that sell a lot of unhealthy products, but then also, in the same policy or introduced at the same time, have incentives and other more positive strategies to help existing businesses offer more healthy products. So you're sort of balancing the potential economic impact of restrictions with supporting local businesses through selling healthy food.
Thanks, Christine and Rio. That was really helpful. And we actually got in more questions about fast food that I'll be responding to in the chat window. Both of you are welcome to join me there as well. But without further ado, I'd like to take us to our next speaker, Tom Redfern. He's the Rural Action Sustainable Agriculture Coordinator. And Tom has spent the last 10 years working on rural food systems challenges in Ohio, and before that, another 20 years in commercial and public horticulture, including 2 years in the Peace Corps where he helped develop an agroforestry curriculum for the Kenya Ministry of Energy. So we're really thrilled to have Tom join us here today. And Tom and I are going to actually do a little bit of a back and forth and interview style here. So once Tom is ready to go, I'll ask his first question, which is, Tom, can you tell me a little bit about what you do at Rural Action Sustainable Agriculture? What's your day-to-day job, and what's the mission of the organization you're working for?
Hi, Tom here. So, like you said, I work for Rural Action. I'm the Sustainable Agriculture Director now, and basically what Rural Action is a nonprofit sustainable development organization that has programs in watershed restoration, sustainable agriculture, and sustainable forestry, and in zero waste systems. And basically what we do is work to develop asset-based solutions to the problems, the endemic poverty problems in Appalachian Ohio. And basically we've been around since the early 1990s, and for 10 years I've been working with the Sustainable Agriculture Program, and basically what we've been working on is building a wholesale food system based around processing, aggregation, and distribution. So we own and operate a produce auction, which is basically an aggregation model. So producers in rural Morgan County, which has about 15,000 people. It's high poverty indicators. It's one of the poorest counties in Ohio, and we operate a produce auction there, which is basically a model where Amish and non-Amish producers bring the produce, and people come from all over and buy it at auction, and from there it's distributed by people buy it for restaurants, people buy it for home canning, people buy it for stores. We buy it in partnership with a whole network of institutions and schools and other partners that we work with. So I'm the produce auction manager as part of my position, which is a legal definition. I had to take a test. So I'm making sure people get paid. I'm working with the farmers. So, and the other thing we do too is Rural Action has programs in education. We focus on peer-to-peer education, taking models of successful farmers and working with those farmers to present their models. Because at the baseline of what we're trying to do is to increase local food production as an economic driver. And so the other things we do, which through the distribution, we have the Country Fresh Stops, which is basically a brand and a distribution system that we work with a handful of small convenience stores in Southeast Ohio, and we purchase from the produce auction and we bring it to those stores. We work with them to stock seasonal. And the other aspect of that Fresh Stops that you're seeing on the slide right now is what we call the pop-up model. So here's a Country Fresh Stops inside a branch campus of West Virginia University. And it's basically what we did there was to partner with the health and wellness program there. So it's a working poor situation at a branch campus. So it's food access right there. And the other place we do that is at hospitals too. And the other thing we do is we supply the produce handling and signage and things like this, just to any entrepreneur who is interested in purchasing from farmers or from the produce auction, just to give them some semblance of marketing to make their product look safe for people to stop and to purchase.
Tom, I'd love to show people who are on the webinar today a little bit of a video clip that shows the Chester Hill Produce Auction in action and tells a little bit of a story about the community where you're working. So I'm going to give this a shot and we'll see if we can get the audio to work. So I'm going to pull up a video for you guys in just 1 second.
Now 3,
doesn't appear that this is actually working. Sorry about that, guys. I really wanted to show this. I'm going to actually ask another question, and I'll see if I can get this functioning in the meantime. So, Tom, if I understand your work correctly, you're trying to create this food access model that bridges farmers who are trying to earn a living, especially small-scale farmers in the community where you're working, with improving access to healthy food, especially for low-income residents. And can you tell us a little bit about how the sort of different programs of this model that you're putting together are working to address that challenge?
Right. So, what you can see from the slides here is that mainly we work in Morgan County, which is the highest black county, in black on your map, and then Athens and Meigs and Vinton. And these are the counties we work in. They're the poorest in the state. It's hilly and heavily wooded, so it's the agriculture that we do have is small scale. I'm here in Athens County right now, which is right in the middle of the three counties in black that you're looking at, and it's home to Ohio University, which is a college town. So basically, Athens is a small island in an area of high poverty. Historically, this was a coal mining area and timber and other what we refer to as extractive industries that basically left behind high unemployment and high environmental and economic distress. So what we've been doing is working in rural areas to move beyond the high success of the farmers market here in Athens. We have one of the best farmers markets in the state. So how do we move that, local food access back to where the farmers are coming from, as opposed to bringing the farmers, into the more urbanized area? So the success we are having is with an Amish community in Morgan County. When you look at rural America, certainly rural Ohio, one of the successes in terms of populations increasing and people thriving are the Amish and Mennonite and horse and buggy populations. So a produce auction is a model that they've developed to bring markets to them. Now our produce auction serves both Amish and non-Amish producers. So it serves as an incubator for farmers. The Amish can stay there and use the produce auction. More Amish have moved into the area because of it, so they're purchasing land, they're making other businesses, they're bringing people from all the region to buy and sell, and we do education all throughout the year. So it's an aggregation model.
Tom, let me see if I can try and show the video one more time. It's really fantastic. I think I might have figured it out. We're going to give it one more shot. Like everything in life, you have to try until you succeed. So let me see if I can pull this up for folks.
The entire county has one high school. There are no 4-lane roads. Only 15,000 people live here, and nearly 20% of them live below the poverty line. This is Morgan County, Ohio. These hills are filled with the sounds of nature. But now, there's a new sound. The sound of commerce. The sound of community.
I'm getting some feedback from folks that there's no video, so
right,
I really apologize. We'll send out some YouTube clips actually for people who want to watch this afterwards. It's a great visual introduction to the county where you're working, Tom, and I really encourage people to watch this as follow-up. So sorry about trying and failing on that one. You were talking about the purpose of the produce auction, which is to kind of provide economic development opportunity for people who are representing small growers in rural Ohio. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your business model. Is your goal to run the produce auction, the country fresh stops, et cetera, without grant funding? What would it take you to get there?
So our goal is essentially to prototype the models, support the entrepreneurs, bring in resources that support the entrepreneurs and that can help people support the risk of the producers to grow their farms, to support the risk of the producer to sell produce, to support, distributors to use our refrigerated vehicles, to drive for each other, to grow that system and then move on. So certainly with the Country Fresh Stops model, we're encouraging stores to hook up with the farmers themselves. You can see the truck, we haul for producers. We supply employment for a retired man who drives for farmers. He shares the truck with us. So it's shared use infrastructure, supporting entrepreneur growth, and then moving on. So to use, to make the destination of the produce auction, to get it to scale, and then move to other areas, to just keep growing. I mean, the whole business model is hopefully to take the local food system from the 3% it is, here in Ohio right now, 3 to 5%, to grow that to 10%. What does that do? I mean, it puts more money in the farmer's pocket. It incentivizes the entrepreneurs to partner with that, to hook up with the farmers themselves for the produce. So it's like, basically it's essentially what Rural Action sustainable agriculture is working to do is to become part of a value chain from the farmer to the distributor to the processor to the schools to the hospitals, where they take a stake in, in supporting each other. Most of the small stores we're in to right now is because they want to support the farmer.
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about what you've learned about food access from the retailer's perspective as you've done this work? So they see their role as having a stake in the local economy. It sounds like from what you're saying.
Right. So the producers who've agreed to work with us are because they see the health indicators. Like, they don't want to be the biggest, distributor for snack food cakes. They see all the space being used, beer and cigarettes, and so to find people that, want to make a change in the community and support a healthy lifestyle, parents themselves. So it's been the relationship. The first thing to get into a store is to have a relationship, and it's like you're competing with small stores, and they just have a certain amount of space, and they have to get a yield from that space to make their profit. So to get them to seed you, some good upfront places is the first. And our problem too is the seasonality of it. Like, we're working with a seasonal produce system, but with season extension and things we're working on, we basically can go from like March through November, and what we've been able to do then is to find restaurants and certain institutions that, like I heard earlier, would split loads, would split cases, split the cost of a case of produce. So certainly retailers can buy, any produce they want to. There's no rules, and the policy with the health departments is it's a at the county level is many of the corner stores, the gas stations, they'll have a deli, they'll sell pizza, they'll sell things like that. So once they're doing that, they've already met the health department standards to sell produce. So we worked with them on the pricing and the whole idea with the business model. The reason we're in certain of these stores is because the health departments at the county level have surveyed local people, and produce access was something that people were looking for. So we try to go to places where the entrepreneurs are supportive and people have identified that they want produce. So it's often same thing with the produce auction itself. It's like we're not really working to change people's minds. We're just working to support what they want to do.
Tom, I've got a bunch of questions coming in as you've been speaking, and I'd love to bring our listeners into the conversation a little bit. If you have additional questions out there, if you've been working on linking local growers and farmers or have questions or comments for Tom, let me know. So let me start with one here from Melissa. Melissa asked, how many pop-up stands do you operate? And maybe I would just expand this a little bit and say, how many Country Fresh stops, including pop-up stands and retailers, are you serving right now?
Right now we're serving about 15, and it goes as so 3 of those would be us serving small stores, and then there are like 3 pop-ups that we directly do. Then there's like 10 or so entrepreneurs, people we refer to as resellers that we work with that purchase the produce. They're supplied with handling guides by us. They're supplied with education that they might identify they need, and signage, and we work with them through the produce auction to support their buying and selling. And then there's people we share the truck with, we'll haul with. So that's the Country Fresh stops. And then we work with currently we're selling fresh produce to 3 K through 12 school districts.
I'm so impressed by your model, and we had more questions than we have time to answer, including questions about using asset-based approaches and how you're actually working to increase the number of jobs. I'd love to follow up with people who ask questions after this webinar is completed, and thanks for engaging with us. But at this point, I'm going to actually move us on to our next speaker to close us out by talking about money, because I know a lot of people who are listening with us today or who will be listening to this recording in the future are thinking about, okay, I want to start something like this in my community. What resources can I look to get this started? So Rio, can you tell us more about finding funding for our healthy retail work?
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Rio Holiday. I am a policy analyst here at ChangeLab Solutions. I just want to mention very quickly, not to be outdone by Christine, that in high school I moved to Barnet, Vermont, which has a population of 1,700 people. It's about 40 minutes away from Canada, and one of my claims to fame is that I once did a U-turn in Canada. So with that introduction, let's talk about money. My presentation is going to be very brief. As Heather mentioned at the beginning, we're doing a 6-part webinar series on healthy food retail, and we did a webinar specifically on funding sources back in May called Going for Green. So if you missed it, you can find it on our website, or you can contact me directly for the link. So right now, I'm just going to highlight a couple of rural-specific funding sources that we covered in May, point you to some good resources for locating state or local funding, and then talk about an innovative funding example from Kansas. And there we go. Okay. So we didn't really get into details of the funding for Tom's program, but I know that they've received Specialty Crop Block Grant funding, or SCBG, which is distributed by the USDA and administered by state departments of agriculture. In short, a specialty crop is really a term of art used by the USDA to describe fruits, vegetables, tree nuts, and flowers or horticulture crops. And at a very high level, SCBG funds must be used to promote specialty crops, which is something that healthy food retail advocates are already doing, right? Trying to get people to buy and eat more fruits and vegetables. So some healthy food retail activities that could be funded include nutrition education activities that promote fruits and vegetables, like taste tests and cooking demonstrations, or equipment like refrigerated coolers or baskets for fruits and vegetables. You can find more information about SCBG in our May webinar and also on your State Department of Agriculture's website. The next funding source I want to mention is USDA Rural Development Funding. Something that I hear a lot in the field is that you have to be really creative in identifying funding for healthy food retail projects, which is especially applicable here because many of these grant and loan programs weren't designed with healthy food retail in mind. But I will mention a couple of programs that have funded healthy food retail projects in the past, so there's a precedent for it. And these include the Rural Business Development Grant Program, the Rural Cooperative Development Grant Program, the Small Socially Disadvantaged Producer Grant, the Rural Energy for America Program, and the Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant Program. Now, I know that I just listed a whole bunch of names and words, but to find out more details, again, you can listen to our May webinar. All of those programs were highlighted. You can go to the USDA Rural Development website or your state's Rural Development Office website. There we go. Or you can get in touch with me, and I can send you a specific link. Okay, so, I'm just looking at my slides here. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about are state and local loans and grants. These will obviously differ from place to place, so I just want to point out 3 good resources for identifying funding opportunities. First, the Healthy Food Access Portal is essentially an online database that culls a number of resources, including funding sources. And you can search for available grants, loans, incentives, and healthy food financing funds by state. Second, the Economic Development Directory is a website that lists economic development agencies within each state. And it's helpful because you can see the statewide agencies, regional agencies, and city-specific agencies that offer different resources and support. And then finally, ChangeLab Solutions has a guide to finding public funding for healthy food retail called Green for Greens, which is available on our website. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to highlight is a creative funding idea that came out of Chapman, Kansas, which you can see on your screen here. So Chapman, Kansas has a population of 1,400 people, and the town lost its grocery store and wanted to develop a new one. And they decided that they would create incentives to attract a grocery store. So the first incentive was a tax incentive, and the town created a revitalization district and renovation area so that it could offer tax abatements to get the store built. And then the second incentive was $600,000. And to come up with $600,000, this is where it gets interesting. The town increased its sales tax by 1% from 6.5% to 7.5%. Then the town went to the local bank and took out a $600,000 loan, which would be paid back with the revenue from the increased sales tax. The town went through a request for business development proposals, and when they identified a grocery store to be built by a community member, they came up with an agreement which said that the store would be open for 10 years, have a meat market, and have a deli. And in exchange, the town would give the store the $600,000 in installments that were tied to development milestones. And if the store violated any of these provisions, then this owner would forfeit the land to the town. So that's just a great, really creative story. I will stop there and hand it back to Heather.
Thank you so much, Rio. I just want to thank everybody who participated with us today and remind folks that they can watch our previous webinars and to please register to join us for our next in the Healthy Retail webinar series. And as always, ChangeLab Solutions is a nonpartisan organization that does not provide legal advice. And on behalf of everyone here at the National Policy and Legal Analysis Network to Prevent Childhood Obesity, here at ChangeLab Solutions, I want to thank Tom Redfern especially for sharing his story, and I really want to thank you all for joining us. If you asked a question we didn't get to, we'll be following up. Thank you so much.